Oh, all right. That was the recording in progress. Thanks, Jim.
Sorry about that.
No, thank you. So what do you all feel that the role of the bass and tenors are? Who are we? What do what do you all think? And I know who I will ask for their opinion if nobody else says anything, but would love to open it up to the group. I see somebody with red sticks and a gray shirt. Kira.
Hello.
Hey, Kira. Thank you for raising your hand. Before you start to speak, why don't you just let us know who you are and where you came from?
So my name is Kira Brenneman. I go to the Virginia Military Institute, in the United States. And I play tenor for the pipes and drums. I'm the first tenor in over 5 years here. So I really don't have any formal teaching other than YouTube and my drum instructor for music theory. But yeah, basically here, I'm a paid percussionist, so I play bass drums on a regimental side as well as pipe band. But I think like here, percussionists especially, we keep the beat of the core, we keep everyone on step, and we keep everyone's music together. Without us, the pipers, they don't really know where they are in their music sometimes, when it gets really, there's a lot of commotion during our parades. So we really help keep everything together.
Okay. Love that. Love to hear that. Anybody else? I see somebody with a black and it's Miriam Campbell.
Hi, Owen. I'm Miriam Campbell. I've been playing tenor for a little over 20 years, and in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, Canada.
Oh,
Mostly,
I know who you are. I love the Okanagan.
yeah. So Kelowna, Vernon, and I also play with the Kamloops Pipe Band as well.
Oh, so I'll look to see you at Piping Hot Summer Drummer then up at Silver Mountain or
Silver Star, yeah. So I have when I've taught new people or sort of people have asked what tenor drumming is, I sort of equate it to we are the visualization of the music that's being played. So with the flourishing, with our beatings and things like that, we're like everyone's looking at us and listening to the whole group. So that's sort of how I take it, and it's very like we're the visual aspect of the pipe band.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Who's next? I see a blue shirt and their name is Carly.
I actually play with Miriam in Kamloops, but I'm the lone tenor drummer up here in Prince George, BC. And I've been playing for about 13 years now. But my opinion of the tuning side of being a tenor drummer is that we kind of bridge that gap between the snares and the rhythm into the tuning of the pipes. We're kind of that happy medium of being harmony, but also rhythm.
Great, love that. Yeah, very good. Who's next? Allie Delani, I see you.
Why are you calling on me for? Okay. I think I think in addition to sort of being, to the point that Carly made about being kind of like the melodic highlights, if you will, I think it also just goes to show it helps to just emphasize the most important parts as well. And to the point of the visual aspects of it too, when you're writing flourishes or swings or whatever, writing them in a way where the large visual moments also are the large musical moments as well. And so again, going along with that same idea of really kind of finishing off the performance, that your eyes are seeing the same thing that you're hearing.
Love that. And the others? I was waiting for you, Cliff. I was just, you were going to be last, Cliff, because I know you have something. But yeah, Okay, well, I see Russ and Jamie Alfred. Let me ask your opinion, Jamie Alfred. I see you in here.
Hi, nice to be
Hi.
here. My opinion, I guess. So sorry, my introduction. I play in City. I live in Toronto and I commute to Florida to play in the band. I've been with Dunedin for 4 years now. Been tenor drumming for close to 30 years. So, I guess my opinion on our role as a midsection, bass and tenor drumming, is really to rhythmically and visually highlight key phrases in the music and really bringing the pipes and drums together.
Love that. Yeah, love that. And, you know, I see somebody else here who I was kind of surprised to see their name, and their name is Andrew Hoineke. So I wonder what he would like to share with us.
Hey, Owen. I plan on being a fly on the wall, my friend.
Well, you're not so sneaky.
Well, obviously. So for those who don't know, I'm Andrew Hoineke, currently drummer at City of Chicago. I started as a tenor drummer almost 40 years ago when Jim Sims' dad taught me how to drum. And then I became a snare drummer when Jim taught me that. So there you go. Goes a long way back. And I remember Owen as a very young competitor making his way through the scene. Bass and tenor drumming for me is definitely it's a percussive contribution to the melody. It introduces the opportunity for a secondary counterpoint, like pipers have harmonies, but how we use the bass and tenor allows us to further enhance the music with the addition of extra tones through percussive means, which can also lead to impact. As drummers in general, we contribute volume. Pipers have no volume switch last I checked. But so drummers have the ability to not only add those tonalities, but also to add them in dynamic effects of quieter and louder, making some of those more interesting things. And then obviously the visual element continues to evolve and is super cool. And yeah, I would agree with everybody else that says it's a way to further enhance. I think it was Allie that said you can see what you're hearing. So I would definitely agree with that.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, it's 100%. You know, and I forgot to ask this. Sorry to cut everybody off, but I forgot to ask, how many do we have? And you can just do this, but do we have anybody that's not a drummer in the audience? How many pipers we got? All right, so I see one on my first screen. And everybody else has their camera turned off on the second screen.
Allison, you're a drummer. Why are you raising your hand? Put your hand down. Also a piper, but you're a drummer.
Yeah, well, so personally, and maybe I don't define a piper or a drum. I don't define drummers as snare drummer or tenor drummer, because in the world that I live and breathe in, a tenor drummer is a drummer just like a snare drummer. They just participate in a different fashion. And I live in a world where it is exceedingly incumbent on any tenor drummer to be able to play basic rudiments and to be a drummer, because that is the fundamental thing that we are being adjudicated on. You know, bottom line, like, we do some really cool things and awesome things, but, and I can put my 6 on there right here. I can show you some of the coolest things you might ever see. But I am adjudicated on in a band function, and we'll talk about band and solo, but my participation in a band, what we do up here, is not being adjudicated on. I wanted to ask Cliff Davis's perspective, because I do see that he is here, and I've looked up the Cliff Cliff has known me as long as anybody here as well.
Yeah. One thing you forgot to mention, Owen, is that you won the gold medal in tenor drumming at Winter Storm, which is a big deal. But I think everyone's pretty much echoed what I would say in terms of tone and the visual interpretation of the music. And to kind of tag on Andrew a little bit about the dynamic effect and the volume control that we have versus the pipes. With the bass and tenor, we can also have absence of notes, which creates a dynamic tension and release. So that is just as the absence of notes is just as exciting as playing the notes in many cases. And then also from my perspective, and I think what to kind of piggyback on what you just said, Owen, is that I remember Reed Maxwell told me once that flourishing doesn't record very well, but it's nice to bring the whole package. So anyway, one more thing is that if you have well-tuned instruments that are tuned to the pipes properly, either with a primary note or a harmonic, it actually there's sympathetic vibration that happens, and it actually makes the band sound bigger. I don't know if you've ever noticed when a bass drummer, if the bass drummer's late coming into the circle, at a rehearsal, and you come in and suddenly, and he starts playing, that band just expands, in my opinion. So anyway, that's about all I have to say at this point.
Love that. Thank you, Cliff. Love that. And you're 100% spot on. So I hope I don't sound like a broken record at times, but thanks everybody. Did anybody else want to share their opinions or thoughts as just kind of who we are and what are we doing here? 5, 4. Okay, good. So again, thanks everybody for sharing their thoughts. So, as I was listening, I heard percussive contribution, dynamic control, important parts, paid percussionists, visualization and tuning. And, those are some of the things that I wanted to talk about and touch on. So my thought, and, I think when we talk about what's our role and who are we, what are we doing, it's already kind of been said. We're putting in a rhythmic and melodic visual element to the band that without the bass and the tenor, again, without the bass and the tenor, would not be there. And as Cliff mentioned, the depth and the sound and the boom and the hum that you get when you add, a bass drum to the sound of the band is unparalleled. You never hear that. And the same thing when you sprinkle in tenors with different notes. So I think if we look at it, all right, so we kind of think we know what we're talking about with what the bass and the tenor is. Yeah. Articulating the accents, articulating, adding to the visual sound, adding to the overall melodic and ensemble sound. But how do we actually do that? So if we look at the 3 kind of key elements of the band, you have the pipe section. The pipe section is 130% responsible for providing melodic input, right? The melody, right? They have their 9 notes, if I believe I'm correct. G, A, B, C, D, E. Yeah, 9, right? So they have their 9 notes. So they can change pitch and kind of volume, right? Because they can go up the scale and down the scale, and we all know that the volume does change depending on which note you're actually playing. That's kind of a known, like the note does sound a little bit louder or quieter. Then we look at the snare drum, right? So the snares are providing the rhythmic element of it. They are pulling accents and phrases out of the piping melody to complement that melody that would only otherwise be, and can only in what we do, be provided by the pipers. So the phrases they might play, blah, you know, that's a common 7-bar, 8-bar ending phrase, right? They give that. They can go high and they can go low and they can play a lot of notes, you know, a ton of notes in a short span of time. But they don't have the ability to change pitch. So then when you talk about the midsection and what the midsection can do, you can change melody played. You can accompany the melody, right? We could accompany the pipe tune exactly. Bing, bong, bong, ba, bum, 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 right? And follow the ending phrase of, you know, a piping tune. Or we could go, you know, we could follow strictly the rhythms, right? We might play the fourth note of a 30-second combination, right? Da ga da ga da, da ga da ga da, da ga da ga da, da ga da ga da da da, right? We could pick up those accent phrases. Da ga da ga da, da ga da ga da da, ba 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 ba. We could pick up those and just highlight that. Or we could do it a little bit more, you know, melodically and follow the melody line. But the cool thing that we have in the bass and tenor that no other section in the band has, and this is a fact, I can control the volume, the pitch, the participation, melody, all that in the bass and tenor. No other section has that creative licensing. Pipers can control, you know, to an extent, you know, the volume, but not really, but the pitch that they're giving, right? They can control that melody, but the bass and tenor can do that with different tones throughout and control high and low. Snare can do high and low, but they can't change the pitch that is provided from those drums. Sure, it sounds a little different when it's lower, you know, when you're playing quiet dynamics versus louder dynamics, but the overall pitch that is presented and delivered to the listener, they can't control. So that's why I think what we do in the bass and tenor is so cool and unique and gives us that extra creative licensing that not necessarily everybody else gets, because we have that ability with the various tones. Now, obviously, depending on, you know, what band you're in, the size of band, you know, that's going to change what you can do and how your bass and tenor can participate. But even with one bass drum and 1 or 2 tenor drums, you can change what the sound of the overall band sounds like. And so when we talk about what's our role, it's providing color, contrast, depth, rhythmic contribution. You know, we are being percussionists. And then, yes, we are being very, very visual. And we'll talk later about how our participation from a visual aspect makes the visual side of the performance a little bit different. And I would encourage all of you to check out, you know, videos of the bands and stuff like that, because everybody participates differently. You know, from a visual perspective, you know, I can tell you, I have spent countless hours on top of the SFU mountain, countless hours in front of mirrors with all of us, not only playing our notes on our drums and Reed, you know, getting us, but also we have spent hours and hours just thinking about how the visual aspect of a certain tune might look. Because when we're playing on the stage in Glasgow in front of 2,500 people, we want to be heard and seen. And how the bass and tenors have participated, and I know people like Jim and, you know, Cliff and others, you know, Jamie, you know, Miriam, you know, everybody that have been doing it for a long while. So when I started when I was 7 years old, and the way that I participate now in a competition has radically changed from the way that I participate in a competition setting in 2023 and 24 and going onwards. And, there's a lot of, people to be thankful for that. So with that said, I think, we're talking about who are we? I feel like we've kind of established where we are, who we are, what we should be doing. Any questions on that before I talk about participation from a solo standpoint? Okay. So from a solo standpoint, of course, the Midwest Highland Arts Fund and MWPBA, congrats to them for another successful year at Kansas City Winter Storm. Unbelievable. Unparalleled event. Especially for bass and tenors, nothing really like it. I mean, they just put the worlds in, and that is fantastic. But, for so long, there was nothing that we even had. And so I think they should be recognized for their achievements and their continued success with that event. So congrats to them. And I think two of them are on this phone call. So congrats, Jim and Cliff. So talking about expectations, what are the expectations of you? You're a solo tenor player. You just picked up the sticks. Like, what do you got to do? I don't know. You're a tenor player that's been playing for a little bit and you're just kind of in there and okay, well, what do you got to do? And you're a tenor player that's kind of, graduated up through the ranks and now you might be considered a professional player, well, what do they want from you there? So wanted to just spend a couple minutes talking about, expectations in the solo field as well. Excuse me. And I think the number one expectation, and I would love to hear Jim's opinion on this, because outside of Kansas City and the World Solo Tenor and a couple other events, 98%, 99% of the time you're going to be playing for a snare drummer. So what are the expectations? What do they want to hear and see from you? So I think if we're looking at the novice level or the entry level, honestly, I think they just want to hear you playing and delivering what you're playing pretty well or decently or okay. If you're playing 1 and 2, they want to hear 1 and 2, and they want to hear it in time and not out of time. They do not want to see you go 1 and 2 and do something that doesn't really, make a whole lot of sense, right? They don't necessarily care if you're going 1 and 2. They just want to hear 1 and 2. And I think that's true of every judge. People want to hear what you can play. And that takes me to my next point of, just the expectation is the number one thing that any judge, and I think that this would be fair for any piper, snare drummer, bass drummer, tenor drummer, deliver what you're supposed to deliver with what's appropriate for the grade level, but what's also, playing in time. Can you do the basic of playing in time? We as tenor drummers get really caught up with the visual side of things, and it impacts our ability to deliver a clean performance from a rhythmic perspective, but that is what we are being judged on. And even I don't know if that's still the case in Ontario today, Jim, you'll have to correct me. I know when I was coming up as a kid, all these years ago, it wasn't that long ago, by the way, it was called rhythm tenor solo, which didn't mean that you were just playing the rhythms, but it just meant it was rhythm solo, rhythm tenor solo. So you're being evaluated on the rhythm that you're playing, not necessarily the swings. And they used to have just a swinging contest where they would line us all up like horses, and we called it a cattle call. And we would just swing for, 7 minutes. Not that that wasn't exhausting in 100-degree weather in Kincardine, Ontario, but still difficult to do. So I feel like when you're even at the novice level, you want to be participating and playing things that you can play. I don't think that judges want to hear you play things that you can't play, but more importantly, they want to hear you play the rhythms and have a solid foundation understanding of, where you're at in that grade level. And if it's the novice grade, I think it's just a 2/4 march. So they want to hear you playing the compound march time, playing well, being able to deliver straight time, not forever, but being able to deliver that time, and then being able to deliver those, maybe you have a couple good ending phrases. And so when I say ending phrase, bars 7 and 8, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, right? Just delivering something that matches what is going on with the rhythm provided by the snare and closely accompanies the melody provided by the pipes. I don't think they are looking for a ton of extra things. Jim, am I off base, or what do you think when you're listening to a tenor solo?
Yeah, bang on. I would just agree completely with playing in time. That's kind of the bottom of the pyramid. And then going from there, if you're playing anything like triplets or single movements or anything, they always tend to be rushed. They think they have to play them as fast as they can rather than playing them in time. So the more complicated the score gets, it tends to be played more poorly, if that is a correlation. But what you said is bang on. You got to play in time and do the basics right. And by the way, I started as a tenor drummer too.
So did Steven Carter, just so that everybody knows. And so did Kermit McClellan. So, and I think Jim was maybe a bit ahead of me, so that brings me more to intermediate or the middle level. We're talking about triplets and perhaps and 16th notes and groupings of those. So in the intermediate stage, we want to hear the basics done right. Like unequivocally has to be done right. You must be able to play 1 and 2. And you must be able to play 1 and, stuff like that. The basics done right. Getting into that intermediate stage, I think that people want to hear, okay, let's hear a little bit of triplets. Let's hear some 16th notes. Dare we get experimental with a 5? And when I say a 5, I mean 4 30-second notes followed by an 8th note. I call it, people will laugh at me, but I call them Minnesota, Maine. Digga-digga-da. But that's just an old way of learning it here. But we want to start to hear more introductions of basic, rhythms, triplets, triplet tap, da-da-da-da. Maybe there's a little bit more dot and cuts, 1 and a little more syncopation, with provided that way. I think that is the spot that they want to see. And then then you can start to experiment a little bit more from a visuals perspective. What does that look like in a visual perspective, and trying to highlight some basic elements of the snare score. We're hearing some things. So is there a way for us to visually show what we're hearing, but being extremely mindful?
Yeah, it's just like throwing me off.
Sorry?
Can we just ask the Brian Baru people and Mike Keppel, can you put your computers on mute? Thanks. Sorry, Owen.
No, thanks, Jim. Just being very mindful of the fact that if we're going to do something up here, that is going to legitimately hinder my ability to be down here on my drum in time for my rhythmic participation. And again, being mindful of the fact that the rhythmic participation that I'm putting onto my drum is the most important part. Once you get to the pros, you're expected to be able to do it all. You should be able to swing extremely fast. You should be able to play any rudiment. And when I say any rudiment, I mean a rough, a 5. Drags wouldn't sound good on a tenor drum, but triplets, singles, 5s, rough 16th notes, all of that stuff. And you should be able to transfer that from up here to down here, essentially like that. Now, I would go as far to say that even the best tenor drummers in the world struggle with that problem. They might not all love to hear that, but I think that people like, again, I would call on Andrew and Jim and Cliff. I think that even the best tenor drummers in the world can do the coolest thing here and think that they might be delivering 100% here, but I am not convinced that the accuracy level is quite there yet. It's close. It's probably 98%, honestly, but it's, that's what you're expected to do as you get to that pro level. Any questions, comments on the kind of the solo side of things? I know there are a lot of people that have asked me about solos and how we participate and how we get it. And so I wanted to talk quickly about preparation and delivery too after the questions. Thanks. Go ahead, Julia. And Kira.
Just a quick question about solo because I'm contemplating possibly competing solo, doing some solos this season. I've only been playing drum for less than a year. I'm with Siren City Pipe Band, and being like so new to everything, is this season too soon? How do you know when you're ready to do a solo comp?
I would. It's a hard answer. There's not a blanket answer. I would say go for it because you don't learn if you don't do it. You never know if you never try. And you never know what's too soon. I mean, I don't know when your first contest is scheduled for. I mean, so somebody might.
I'm sorry.
Sorry?
This is my second season. I played last season as well. I started on the snare, transitioned to tenor. But even though I'm a novice, I'm doing triplets, I'm doing fours, fives. I'm doing a lot of different embellishments, syncopations. I have a music background, so it's not difficult, and I love doing it.
So then the answer to your question is no, it's not too soon. Now your next thing is, okay, so what can you do to prepare? And that brings me to my next point of, okay, preparation. So we unfortunately have the disadvantage of having to have not one, but two other people play with us, and they are our accompaniment. Even though the tenor and bass drum are accompaniment instruments, in solos, the piper and the snare drummer are accompaniment instruments. And so that makes it difficult. But I always encourage people to go for it. And if they think they can do it, do it. And you never know until you go for it. And we need more people to participate to keep it going. So don't feel discouraged. Go for it is my short answer. I think somebody else had a question too. Kira?
What would you say for solo competition specifically? How would you begin choreographing movements along with a song? Like I have You Jacobites by Name as just a competition piece we have with my band. So like how would you recommend I go about choreographing something to mesh with it well for a beginner?
Yeah. So so in SFU, we write every swing that we write is designed to a movement or a passage or a phrase provided by the snares. And this might be a little further, but we like to pick out big notes. So let's say that we're playing a march that has a 2-bar ending phrase that sounds like this.
Hey, Owen, you have to enable original sound.
Oh, Lord. How do I do that? Ellie.
You click on there's like the 3 little dots under more, and enable original sound should be an option. And if not, then it's a longer answer if you don't have that available.
Woo, I just have a MacBook, so I don't know.
But yeah, it should show you enable original sound when you click on the more button.
Oh, God. You would think that I'd be better. Apologize, everybody. Sorry. How's this sound?
Oh, and I think you need to go into the settings. I'm also on a MacBook. So if you go into Zoom and then go to preferences.
Yeah.
And then on the audio tab, I think that might, there's audio profile, Zoom background noise removal.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Don't
Here.
want that one checked. Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't checked. The original sound. Okay. Let's see if that does it. How's this? No?
Nope.
No. Background noise suppression is also in that menu. So you'll want to select.
How about this?
I think.
Sing it to us.
Yeah, I can just sing it to you. So if I was playing like an ending phrase, so I'll go really slow. Blah, digga-digga, ja, digga-digga, ja, digga-digga, da, brah. Blah, digga-digga, ja, digga-digga, digga-digga, da, brah. Okay. Everybody hear those claps? Okay. No, I hear some people that didn't hear the claps. I'll try it again.
I mean, we can see you clapping. So
Okay, what if I said da 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 da? Okay. Da 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 da. So that really in snare drumming talk, that phrase sounds like blah digga digga blah da ja digga digga ja digga digga ja. So there's like a flam, then a rough, then a 5, and another drag, and then a 5. So something really, now this is really simple, but you could go blah digga digga da digga digga da digga digga da da da. Right, and I'm just literally picking up the accents, but then you could change that a little bit and go blah digga digga da digga digga da digga digga da 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 da, right, da 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 da. 1 E and 2 E, 1 and 2, right? So if we were counting it out, you'd literally just be doing flats. That was what I was doing there. 1 E and 2 E, 1 and 2, to really pull out the accents that the snares are providing from a rhythmic standpoint. And then we, again, with all of our creative licensing, have the ability to show a visual cue of 1, 2, or 1 E and 2 E, 1 and 2. And that's where, and you start to do that as you go from, as you move on in your kind of progression in your tenor drumming career. And the more, as you get to the pro level, that's when we would be looking for you to really be showing it, we might want, we might want a little bit more of a little bit more, and you see how I was kind of doing, I was still following that same rhythm of 1 E and 2 E, 1 and 2. But what I was doing was a little bit more, right? So I was technically actually swinging like a 30-second note, right, with my hands. But that's progressing on. I think we should go, just to be mindful of our time. Band expectations. How do we participate in a band? And you have to think of, well, how many tenors do we have? How many snare drummers do we have? What's the ratio? They always say, 3 snares to every 1 piper. I don't know if that ratio, especially for our purposes, is 100% accurate. So there's that ratio, and then maybe 2 snares for every 1, or excuse me, 2 tenors for every 1 snare, maybe, depends again. But if you're tuning, you might, if you're lucky enough to have 4 tenor drummers, you might look at tuning a high a E, a C sharp, and maybe a D. And all those are, of course, off of the drones, and you take the low A of the bass drone, and we want to get their number. So most of the time when the pipers are tuning up, they're taking the pipe major and pipe sergeant, or whoever's in charge of the sound, they're taking their chanters and figuring out what's the best number and arriving at a number so they can give you a number. So whoever's in charge of tuning the pipe core can give you a number and say, hey, today, Allie, we will be at 484. And sometimes your tuners can actually get you to 484 on the bagpipes, depending on what tuner you have. And other times, if you just have a chord tuner, you might have to do a little bit of math, and I'm not the best on the math part on that. Andrew could help you with that part of it. I am not good with that. I'm been
Plus 27.
Yeah, I've been spoiled enough, so I don't have that math calculation. But you can get there, and then you can set your notes based on where you're at. So if you got 1 or 4 tenors, maybe A, E, C sharp, D. If you got 6, like we had A, G, E, C sharp, D, B. Yeah, the range varies, but if you just got 1 tenor, look to just do your A, because that'll be your highest note. It's the most commonly used note on the bagpipe is the A. Go with that, set it, and then your bass drum will be to an A as well. Same for solos. And the reason I say that for solos is because as you lower the pitch of your drum, the clarity fades away. So with a solo, when you're playing it with just solos, you might lose some of the clarity in your playing, and you don't want to lose that clarity when you're playing solos because you're drumming more. So they might want to hear more rhythmic elements. And so the lower the drum, the harder it is to pull out those rhythmic elements and have them be delivered very, very cleanly. Matt Balia did an exceptional job playing, I think, a 20-inch tenor drum the first year he won a gold medal. It was exceptional because you could hear every single stroke that he played. That is very hard to do. So I would recommend, if you're just playing solos, go to your A drum. Want to talk a little bit about, preparation and delivery. So how are we preparing? It's not just learning your music and learning your scores and your swings and your bits. It's everything from the night before to when are we meeting? You have to kind of corral all that, being the tenor or bass soloist, which is something, again, that we don't have to our advantage. I'm relying solely on a piper and a snare drummer for my tenor solo. And there is nothing I can do about it, frankly, at all. And I have been in positions where I have had to rely on my snare drummer, and that has been a challenge. And same for pipers. And so I think, especially because it's really, yes, it's tenor and bass drum solo, but it's really more of a ensemble performance. And so when we look at what that means, I think 99% of the time, the player that wins the bass and the tenor solo has the best ensemble performance by a country mile. And I can say that the time that I was fortunate enough to be victorious at the gold medal event, I had a very good ensemble performance there. Very good piper, snare drummer. That was something that I didn't always have in the other years. Not saying that that was the only thing, but I do believe that, hey, it's an ensemble performance. You really need to have as solid accompaniment as you can get. And when I say solid, I mean, at the most ground level, basic level, like, hey, can they play your tunes without like looking at music? But that also goes into what you decide to play. Don't make it too difficult for your accompaniment. hey, if you know that your snare drummer is playing in that same event later in the day, play their music and you write your stuff to them, because it's going to sound better if you're playing to them and what they're playing than if you're playing something to them and they're not really meshing or gelling. So, and same for band. But again, band is, of course, more plotted out and planned out, and you've been working on it longer. But play what's appropriate for your group. I have been fortunate enough to benefit from having a really talented group the last 2 years, so we could maybe participate in a different way. But I think Jim and Cliff will tell you this: judges don't want to hear you participating and playing things that you simply cannot play. They don't want to hear splits when we're splitting the drum notes and who's participating. They don't want to hear things that you can't do. If it's out of time, it's out of time. And if it's out of tune, it's out of tune. And those are distracting. And we don't want to be distracting from the performance. We want to add and enhance the performance. Am I on the right page, Jim? Or
Not to use a pun here, but bang on.
yeah, we don't want to be distracting. We want to participate, but we don't want to participate too much or too little. But when we do participate, we want it to be really good. And so I think the cores that perform and that are doing really well right now are participating with really well-tuned drums, but they're participating in a manner that is appropriate for their team or their section and for their band. And I think that there are a lot of cores out there that are participating in ways that are not the most beneficial. We can't add contrast and comparison if we're just banging away on our drums. It's terrible and it doesn't sound good, nor does it look good, frankly. But we got to figure out a way to contribute without pulling away, if that makes sense. So we don't have a lot of time. I've been chatting at you. Let me know your questions. Go ahead, speak up.
Oh, and I got one for you as an adjudicator. It seems a lot of times when the lower grade bands have just one tenor drummer, that one tenor drummer tries to play the parts of 4 or 5. And as you kind of touched on there, it's pretty distracting. And maybe you can speak a bit to, if there's fewer numbers in your tenor section, play within yourselves kind of.
Yep, that's a great point. As I was kind of mentioning, what's appropriate. Play within yourselves. Don't try and pick up, the tenor. We're kind of like the rototoms or the kit drum, right? We don't play every single note. If there was if you were listening to, I don't know, whatever your favorite band is that uses a drum set, it would be really distracting and annoying if all you heard was that high A tom drum. It'd be like, oh God, shut up. And so don't allow yourself to be caught in that mess of participating more than you maybe ought to. Now, does that mean that you don't play anything? It's just finding that balance and finding what makes sense for your group, but also being able to realize, hey, if I don't play as much in this part, that means that what I'm doing in this second part will sound so much cooler. And then if I'm chilling out in the fourth part, it'll sound so much cooler and my overall impact will be greater. Does that help answer that, Jim?
Okay, so my question was, I don't know what happened to my video, but anyway, there we go. My question is the opposite. When you said, if you can't do splits, don't do splits in competition, I understand that. But if you have 4 or 5 tenors, how do you divide things up without splits? Maybe I'm misinterpreting what you mean by a split.
So when I say splits, I mean we have one person playing one note. So if we've got 5 of us, I would suggest that your tenors be tuned to A, E, C, and D, or C sharp. And so that would mean maybe A doesn't play all of those notes in that score. Maybe you adjust what the rhythm is.
You mean they don't play all the high notes, or they just don't play all the notes?
Maybe the tenor, maybe the participation from the tenor, knowing that you only have one instead of five, is less overall. So maybe you don't play as many notes that are written. So when you're writing a tenor score, and I should have touched on this, you're writing it to the rhythm of the snare, and the lead drummer should be writing that to the rhythm of the snare score, or somebody that is very well versed in the rhythms of the snare drumming. So in SFU, Reed writes all the bass and tenor, all of it. If I or somebody else has an idea, we are more than welcome to participate and contribute. But Reed writes, the lead drummer writes all the music, and that's how I've done it for a long time. It's not every band. Some bands are different, but I think that's a good way because why? The lead drummer has a hearing and has a thought of how it'll all kind of sound together. And Jim and Cliff, please jump in, and Andrew Hoineke, jump in there. They have a vision of how it kind of might all sound. Maybe they aren't necessarily thinking about, okay, if the high tenor plays this here or there, but they might be thinking about how the whole bass and tenor sound will have an impact on the whole drum corps sound provided. Am I on base there, Andrew, Jim, Cliff?
Definitely. That's the lead drummer's writing the snare music, and I think when you write that, you've got, as you said, an idea of how the whole thing will fit together.
Okay. Yeah, and so maybe if you know that you only have one tenor, maybe you are reducing the participation because you know that you have a limited number, and that means that you know that you'll have a limited number of sounds or tones that can be produced. Doesn't mean you still can't participate, it's just how. And I think that a lot of midsections struggle with, how are we going to participate, or when do we participate? What's the most appropriate time? And, you know, I would honestly err. I have never in all the years it's been, I've never once had a score sheet, at least in a band setting, say, hey, we would really like to hear some more tenor notes. You know, that cowbell would have been really awesome to hear more. Jim, have you ever written that down?
Not that I remember, no.
Andrew Hoineke?
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not.
Cliff Davis?
Hey, Owen, this might be a good. You had a bit of wisdom when you were out here with our section last spring. I guess it was this. No, it was last spring. About the intersection of bass and tenor and people playing kind of on top of and over each other. I think that might be something to consider in the voicing as well, making space for each other so that the notes can be heard well and the splits don't sound too complicated. That was a good bit of wisdom we took away.
Yeah, and that was one of my, if you can believe it, you know, it's not to say that Reed and I agree on every last little thing. Who would think that it could be hard to disagree with Reed Maxwell? When you're playing, you can't play over top. And I think if we're thinking about, and this stinks because I can't do it, but let's say that there's like a roll pattern, right? So I'm just gonna hum a roll phrase. Blah does that that. I'll do it again. Blah does that. So now the bass and tenor could go ba 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 ba. But does it make more sense for the bass and tenor to go ba 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 ba? You see the space that's given there, right? Okay, so play that over 5 drums or 3 or 2, or just play. Do you hear how there's a little bit more space there, but gives the opportunity for the tenor to participate? The tenor can still participate, just in a different facet, right? Without being over top. And that's such a Scottish way of saying it. Over top. What am I trying to say? Muddying. That's still more Scottish. making the snare score sound untidy by playing notes at the same time of them. Does that make sense, Andrew?
Yeah. Also, anything related to percussion, including clapping, technology thinks is noise.
Oh, so that didn't, you couldn't hear anything.
Yeah, if you clap, it's the same as tapping on a drum. Zoom just thinks it's noise. Welcome to my world.
Okay, so what about, okay.
No, but you're right.
But
I think the other.
I think at least I can speak for myself that I still understood what you were trying to say because I could like see the rhythm that you were trying to play. So it still came across.
Give me one more second. So like da 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 da, right? That's what like that like sounds like a grade 1 phrase that I've played a million times. Or could you go ding dong 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 bong bong bong, right? Could we still pull out the same phrases? Could we still pull out that same accenting phrase and make it more impactful by taking some of the notes away? Or does it have to be ding 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 ding? Or could it just be ding 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 ding, right? But that's where you find where it's appropriate for your group and for your section and for the people that you have there. Cliff.
So just to piggyback on what you've been saying, less is more. And it's not the notes that you play, but the notes that you don't play, really, that make it very impactful. And I'll just leave it at that.
Love that. So can you share, tell me how you've used that in the cores that you've led, because you've led lots of cores in the time, tuning, playing. So how has that been impactful now and today?
So, for example, let's say there's a 4-bar phrase, and bass and tenor or tenors play in the first 2 bars, and then you're expecting to hear maybe more in the 3rd and 4th bar, but you don't do it. You don't give it to them. You wait, and then you come back in maybe the 5th bar. This is a real simple example, but it's dynamic tension. Like people are expecting to hear, oh, they're not playing. Oh, they're still not playing. Oh, there they are. And it's just kind of a nice tension and release.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm walking around. Perfect. So, and you know, that brings me to a point of my very first teacher, Mr. Joe Hickey. You know, give them more and then take it away. Give it to them the first time, take it away the second so that they miss it. Don't give it to them the first time, give it to them the second time, and then they're like, oh, darn, that was really cool. Can I get that? But then they can't get it because it was on the double forte. So they only get it the one time. That's a classic Joe Hickey. That's a classic Joe Hickeyism, and I still use those today in my, in my practices and teaching. So,
on that note, Owen, what are your thoughts on the tenor drums hitting at the same time as a bass drum, like right on the beat that they're playing together or something?
I would try to, if at all possible. A quarter note is maybe doable, but odd notes and syncopation, because then you're going to get the notes are all tuned to a certain chord, right? But it might not be great to have a tenor playing the same note as a bass note at the same time, because it's not going to sound good, because you're just really only going to hear 2 sounds going boom, and you're not going to be able to deafen that sound. So you're going to hear 2 notes at the same time. I do think that sometimes, you know, especially in stress bass, when we're looking for a stronger pulse, and everybody knows the pulse in a stress bass that we're looking for, right? It's the strong, weak, medium, weak. So I think maybe on a strong beat, maybe that would work. Reed will do that sometimes because he wants a little bit more depth and a little bit more punch on that first note of some of those measures sometimes, but that doesn't mean that he wants it all the time. So again, it's where it happens, but I wouldn't be going and playing one E and two E, like that wouldn't be. So I was the E notes, it would be the tenor notes and bass notes. You wouldn't want to do those two at the same time because it would be too hard to make a good sound out of the tenor and the bass at the same time because the way the drum resonates when it's played. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I kind of set you up there, but you hear that a lot in the lower grades. They're playing over the bass drum. And they also, I think if you make like the first note of the first measure, I would avoid from playing that as well, because a lot of times you'll hear boom instead of one note. They won't be quite right together, and you almost hear like a flam type sound. So little things like that can lose you a contest, but they'll never win you a contest, and especially in the lower grades.
No, he's absolutely same sound. And just to go a little bit further, that boom, it's like the bass hits a little sooner and then the tenor hits after, or the tenor hits sooner than the bass, and you don't want that two sounds. And like I said earlier, we don't want to be distracting, and that I'm sure can become rapidly distracting quickly, right, Jim and Andrew? Like that can become a quick problem real quick. All of a sudden you're hearing or boom or two things, and it's like whoa, that's not melodic at all. And to touch on that even further, Jim, I think playing straight time, the idea of playing 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, I know that we want to feel that strong weak medium weak strong weak medium weak. Think about when you're delivering that and think about who's delivering that. Is that the most musical thing? Does it sound good for tenor drummers and bass drummers to be doing that all together? Wham, 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 wham. Probably not, and that certainly doesn't follow the melody of any tune. There's no tune where it would make sense for all five of the or four of the tenors or however many tenors and the bass to all be playing that at the same time. There's no tune that would ever lead itself to that. So there would be no percussive or melodic reason to really do that from a bass or tenor perspective. We do it with bass drums, especially, to get into a stress bay. They're definitely going to play that first measure of dum da adi da da di adi da, right? Like those first two measures, it's imperative of the bass drum. But after that, open it up and let it have some space to breathe, because we're not all going to be doing it doesn't make melodic sense. What else? What are some other questions? Krista and Allie. Krista.
So I'm working on teaching some people who are not percussionists but have a musical background, tenor flourishes and notes. Do you find it easiest to learn one before the other, or to learn them at like the same time? Or how should I like go about teaching them?
So I think what I'm hearing is when you say one before the other, I feel like you're asking me, should I teach them the notes first or the swings first? Am I on track? Okay, so my answer would be unequivocally the notes. Anybody else agree there? Just raise your hand or nod. Oh, look at all of you. Okay.
Yeah, our grade 4 band happened to win best midsection last year during one of our competitions, and we did 0 swings.
Yep. It's certainly not gonna lose you. It's not gonna lose you a contest. Sorry, it's not gonna win you a contest. It could lose you a contest if, like Jim mentioned, if you're swinging too much and you can't play after your swings. I do happen to know that there was one time where the swinging benefited us to our best of ability, or excuse me, best to our ability, but that was only because our rhythm was that good too. And Andrew Hoineke was judging that contest actually at the Chicago Highland Games in probably 2008, maybe 9. But the rhythm is paramount. It has to, that's most important. It has to be good. The swings are a bonus. It's like a gift wrap on a Christmas present, or a bow, or excuse me, the bow on the Christmas present. You know, present's most important. The wrapping is nice, but that bow really doesn't, you know, were you gonna be happy if you get a box full of coal and you've got a pretty bow on it? Probably not. So that's kind of how I look at it, at least. Somebody else had a comment, I think. Ellie.
Yeah, so the question that I had was, when you're looking at a few different midsections, and I guess I'm thinking probably more from a judge's perspective, what are you looking for when you're trying to award the best midsection? And or what are you not looking for? Like, I know, like, that's, I feel like we've probably talked a lot about some of that, but just in particular, like the types of things that would
No,
kind
but
of
maybe
stand out.
for me, and you know, Andrew and Jim might disagree a little bit on this, but I want sound. Sound is my number one for me. It's probably because I'm the sound guy at SFU. I don't know, but I care a lot about sound. And well, in grade 1, I would expect that the rhythmic element should not be, it should all be up here, right at the top, right? It should all be very darn good. So we should be almost splitting hairs. For in a lower grade, I definitely want to hear playing, number one, playing in time, not overplaying, but I really want to hear decently sound drums. And I think that I feel like that goes somewhere in other aspects of the pipe band competition as well, the aspect, but I'm not necessarily able to speak to that so much. But I think I want to hear good sound. I want to hear good playing. I don't want to hear overplaying. I want to hear.
So, Owen, when you say good sound, do you mean dynamics, or do you mean tuning? Like, what do you precisely mean by sound?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean tuning. I want to hear good, well-tuned drums. I think that tuning is very much an afterthought. So I personally can't appreciate somebody playing 1 and 2 in time if their drum sounds like a trash can you might find in Sesame Street. That is hard for me to personally hear. I don't think that that's good for the listener. But obviously,
let me add, I agree with you on what you said 100%, but in lower grades, again, in particular, Allie, I would say the volume level. You're not overplaying the volume. I don't have to really reach in to hear you. It's played at the proper volume. I think that's important too, based on the size of your band.
No, he's one because we hear that all the time. And thanks for bringing that up, Jim, because we hear bands with 2 tenor drummers and maybe 5 or 6 pipers and 3 snare drummers, and the bass and tenor are the loudest thing in the whole performance. And that's not what it's about. We are not ever really meant to, specific times, maybe we are meant to be the loudest portion of the band, but in general, that's not our job. We are not to be the loudest instrument of the band at all times. Naturally, the bass drum is the loudest instrument in a pipe band, naturally, but we are not meant to be the focus of attention at all times. So I really like how Jim mentioned the volume there, because we shouldn't be overpowering, and it should be, again, appropriate for our group. And so you got a really large pipe section, you know, maybe your volume is different, but you have to be super mindful of that. And so I think when judges are looking to award that particular award, as Jim mentioned, the volume, I think the contribution, the playing, and the time, you know, if all those things are met, then maybe the visual aspect will come into it. Like I said, I've had it happen to me a couple of times. But the paramount thing is participation, volume, rhythmic accuracy, tuning. What else? What are some other questions people have? Miriam?
Owen, do you have a preference on, like, if you have a number of tenors, say 4 or 5 in a circle, do you have a preference on where those tones stand in the circle? Like, if, like, do you have, yeah, just wherever anybody wants to stand?
So I will, reluctant to say this. It shouldn't matter, is where I would leave it. But I mean, admittedly, like so the way that, and it's different everywhere you go. Some places place their strongest swingers on the end. Some places place their strongest swingers on the inside. We have kind of over the years in SFU, we've kind of evolved that process and our thought process behind that. But we feel like if you're playing in our core, you should be able to play your drum and we should be able to hear it wherever you are. Obviously, it's going to carry different and this and that, but long story short, no, I don't. I'm reluctant to say this, but like I say, I'm hesitant. I put my strongest swingers in the middle, because just if you're looking dead on and you don't look like this or that, and you're just staring straight behind the lead drummer, you're only going to see your strongest. You're only going to see the people in the middle. So they're only going to see your strongest swingers. I don't know if they're looking around. That's where I go.
Oh, and I took that question a little bit differently, and I'll ask you the question based on Miriam's past question there. Do you prefer the tenors to face the front of the band or face the snare drummers?
Okay, yeah, I was wondering if that's where that was going. I've done it both ways. Done all right both ways. I think personally for me right now, I think I would prefer them to face the pipers. Just from a rhythmic contribution and sound contribution of the band, I think that I like the sound that is produced more from the midsection when the tenors are facing the pipers versus the tenors sound going directly out to only the drumming judge, which would mean that they're only getting the top head going out the back. Chorus have been successful both ways. Reed has done it both ways, multiple times both ways, frankly. I think that, especially overseas, that is maybe more of a desirable way. Or I think that that's what's preferred.
Yeah, I think you have to look at the ensemble effect as well. And especially in North America, the ensemble judge will 99 times out of 100 be a piper. And they tend to stand at the head of the band behind the pipe corps, which is then if you're facing them, that's where you're facing. So my 2 cents.
Yep, and that's fair. And, I don't know if there will be more. I guess that's where people like Jim have the job of, broadening that panel and making them have to. Hey, can you walk another 20 feet this way? I don't know, but no, he's absolutely right. I mean, it's just being mindful of where your judges are and what they're going to be looking for. And I think overseas or over here, they're probably going to be up towards the front or up the front of the band. They might not be out the back. They might do a little ditty or a wander. I don't know. I think Bob Worrell and Ken Eller really do a good job of wandering. Just to name some examples, but you never know. But I mean, like Jim says, 99% of the time they're probably going to be out the front of the circle. So I think as the midsection, we should be mindful of where our judges are going to be and give them the best opportunity to hear us, and give them the best opportunity to hear how we contribute to the overall band sound. So if we're facing the other side and they don't hear it versus people that are facing the other way and they do hear it all as one, I feel like that might have impact as to what they hear.
Owen?
Yeah. What's up, Cliff?
I would add a couple of things. I think that if you have tenor drummers that are in the lower grades, this is just my personal opinion, and you're trying to make sure they're really keyed in rhythmically to the lead drummer, then there's a benefit in having them face the lead drummer. But also make darn sure that your drums are tuned. When you measure the pitch off the top head, measure it off the bottom head too. You've got to measure both, and I also measure off the shell too. I get the drum in balance, the tenor, so that no matter which angle you're hearing that tenor drum from, it's the same pitch. So you've got to really pay attention to that Nats stuff there. Regarding for me, with when you have players that aren't at a, say, grade 2 or 1 level, that having them face the snare drummer does have some benefits. So
No, that's a good point, and you're absolutely right, especially when we're thinking about starting to finally subdivide, 16th note phrases and things like that. That I think that's really important to consider as well, and where you're at. My only thing is I don't want you sitting there and being like, okay, I've got the E of 2, so I'm going to be sitting here one, it's a little bit more musical than just that and just getting it on the one E, right? Joe always used to tell me, play it like it sounds, not like it's written. And there is something to be said for that. But I think where Cliff goes with being able to be keyed into that lead drummer and watching their sticks for certain accent phrases, and it gets back into that blah, 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 blah pattern that I was using. You can see that because their sticks are going to be going blah, 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 or you can see what the sticks are doing. So I think that that's a good visual cue for a bass and tenor as they're watching the snare play, to really make sure, as Cliff said, to be keyed in to what's happening there from the snare, from the snare section, from a rhythmic perspective, perspective. So.
I'm going to jump in here for a sec on this too, actually. I definitely agree that there is an advantage to facing the lead drummer. The challenge and the caveat, especially with the bands that I work with, if I've got midsections that are facing in, is really managing that volume, because the volume off of top of that drum is going to go directly to the back. And that's when you're going to get a lot of those comments from your drumming judge that the midsection is too loud. So when you're facing the back, it's being very, very mindful of the volume and just how your drum projects off the back of to the back of the band. And I think that that's where bands that do face in, a lot of sections get it wrong. And that's where they can be a little bit overpowering.
Yep. And let's go a little bit further with that. And so why is that, right? So if we're facing the snares and we're playing into the band, we're capturing that loud drone sound and that chanter sound. And so some of that stuff that would be coming off the top that would go out the back is getting caught up by the pipe sound if we're facing snares. So the theme that I keep hearing from everybody, and I think we can all agree, is the volume and the participation and being mindful of that volume. Excuse me. So you almost have to have, and we do this all the time, I'm constantly stepping out of the circle, is listening to what's happening. And don't just listen to your recording, because that's going to sound different than what the judge is going to hear. Take somebody, and it can't be the bass drummer, unfortunately. Take a step out, listen to what's happening out the back, and see what that volume feels like overall. Are you hearing it too much? Are you hearing it just right? Like Jim said, are you hearing it kind of without having to struggle to hear it, but without having to really, focus in on hearing it? Or are you just hearing it nicely? And if you do that, that might be really helpful, because it's too hard to put a stamp on it and say, oh, the volume for everybody should be this. It's going to be different every time. It's going to be different inside. It's going to be different outside. It's going to have a difference with the heads, with the sticks, with the drums. It all makes a big, big difference. So considering all those factors, taking all that into consideration is going to impact what your core you know, what the performance your core might put out on the field. Did I see another hand? I thought I did. No.
I have a quick question again. So you made a comment at the beginning of the workshop that, like, at the end of the day, like, tenor drummers are drummers first. I know one thing that we often struggle with in my grade 4 tenor core is knowing like what we should have them warm up on, because normally we sit, you know, the snares sit there and we warm up and we do like our hand exercises or whatever, or our drills, and we're like, well, I don't know what the tenor should be doing. So then they end up just sitting there and they maybe sometimes tap along. But so it probably is not the best question given your sound problems. But do you have any like suggestions for drills that tenors can do like at the beginning of rehearsal to like improve
Well,
the general
knowing that I know that you play with Andrew, I would ask Andrew for the first 4, maybe 5 lines of the Deathert singles exercise. Because you can do those on your hands and you can make your sticks work the way they need to. You can do all that on those Deathert exercises. And Grant and I actually do those all the time. Andrew, you know what I'm talking about?
It's the Alex Duthard book 1. I think it's page 13 or 14.
Of course, you know that.
Yeah, you know, probably one of my favorite exercises, maybe a couple times a day, every day.
Andrew, that's what our core is doing right now. We warm up with that Duthard page.
How did I know that people would like that?
Well, hey, there's also this fabulous new book that came out from your drum boss that probably has some cool stuff in there for anybody who wants to be better at, I don't know, drumming.
Yeah. Yeah. You should all buy Taking No Shortcuts by J. Reed Maxwell. There's my shameless promotion. Yeah.
I mean, it's made a couple of us better drummers along the way.
No, that would be yeah. So I mean, sure. Can you get into, you know, rolls and some of the single movements and stuff like that? No, but being able to do those would only help with whatever you're doing from a tenor drumming perspective, and even bass, but certainly a tenor, right? Because if you have the stick control to deliver good, if you can deliver that, you're gonna be able to play any rudiment that you need to on the tenor very well. So
Oh, and can I piggyback on something you just mentioned about the difference between the tenor and the snare drumming rudiments?
Yeah.
It's no coincidence at all, in my opinion, that most of the world's best tenor drummers also play snare.
That's actually
every single gold medalist so far is also, whether as a primary or secondary or started or somewhere along the line, did play snare drum in order to improve, if nothing else, their rudimental playing abilities and how their maybe principal voice, if they consider themselves a tenor drummer first, they understand that snare thing. You said before when you're talking about composing, like understanding what you're trying to play with, what you're trying to write toward, what you're trying to listen into, actually dabbling, even if you don't ever intend on playing snare drum in public, dabbling in some of those rudimentations would be super, super helpful. And the reverse is also true. I just, like a couple other people on the call, including yourself, we happen to have been both at some point or another. But there's a lot to be said about the benefits of that, dabbling in both, even if you don't intend to do it.
No, and just to back Andrew up, he's absolutely right. I mean, so if we look at the first gold medalist, Michael O'Neill, followed by Neil Bruce, followed by Andrew, followed by Matt, followed by Kyle, followed by me, followed by Jordan, followed by Sam. Sam is actually the best snare drummer out of all of us, but Sam Johnson could play in the open snare drumming class right now, today. And you know, the rest of us can kind of hang out in the grade 2, grade 3 level, maybe, you know, but everybody is a really good snare drummer. And you know, maybe we did it for no fault of our own. Maybe we were just, you know, fun, whatever, but it is extremely beneficial. Oh, Danielle, I miss Danielle. Her too. I mean, her dad was the lead tip of Tully Ligon. there's a solid background with the snare drumming there that, you know, all of us have, whether, you know, Neil Bruce is still playing in shots and made the finals several times in the snare drumming, you know, but he was traditionally first a tenor, and we all do, to Andrew's point, have have a solid snare drumming background and can hear and can understand, and that's really helpful in band settings. And even like Allie, when I came to your band practice, like I could hear what you guys were doing, and so I was like, Andrew, what's going on here? Like, let's talk about this measure, because I can hear something's happening. So being able to identify quickly and be like, oh yeah, I can hear that 2-bar phrase, and being able to look at that and see what that actually means on paper from a snare drumming rhythmic perspective will only be able to enhance what you can provide to your team in the midsection from a rhythmic perspective there, and visual as well. That makes sense? Okay, good. What else? What other questions people have?
I have a question. So, when you were talking about solo competing earlier and competing at a higher level, you were talking about how some players really struggle to take swings from up here and kind of transition down into playing the drum, and then kind of to transition back and forth between the two at a high proficiency. For people looking to, whether in band or solos, to play up from kind of like the middle skill range, like into those advanced levels, like what would you recommend to help kind of fine tune that skill?
Number one, I would recommend getting more solid in your rhythmic foundations and rudiments, because if you're struggling to get down, it's not necessarily about you struggling to get down. I mean, it is, but if you can't deliver the rhythmic foundations, I would say at an above proficiency level, and Andrew and Jim, please jump in. I'd say if you can't do the rhythmic contributions at an above proficiency grade, doesn't matter how fast you get down, because you could come down a whole beat early. You could be right, and get down. But if you can't do the 5 Minnesota Maine, you know, well, doesn't matter how soon you come down. So I would say get to your rhythm, make sure your rhythmic foundation is solid, and then make sure that you're working on catching to get yourself down in time, but set yourself up for success. Don't set up a visual that is going to make you have to work harder than it is ever to play that 5. There's no reason for that, and you don't get any extra points for that. So if you have something that's happening, get down in time, but also make sure that what you're playing, again, is appropriate, and make sure that you can play what you're actually trying to play. Because even if you have enough time, if you can't play that rudiment correctly, it's never going to come across cleanly. And that would be the same if you were just playing snare and not just playing snare, but that would be the same if you were playing snare. And if you were playing a paradiddle into a drag 5 movement, wouldn't really matter if you could play the paradiddle. If you couldn't play the drag 5, you wouldn't be able to, that whole phrase is going to sound messy, those 2 beats, right? Andrew, Jim?
Exactly. Yeah, you have to be able to play it for sure.
Right? Like I can't play paradiddle. If I can't play diggity-ga-da, doesn't matter how good that paradiddle is. You have to be able to play those rudiments right. So being able to play all your rudiments correctly is going to impact what it sounds like when you come down from any sort of visual movement. Does that make sense? So it's not so much cleaning up what's happening here, it's more cleaning up what's happening here, so that when you do get down from here, this is going to sound really good. And that's where I think people kind of lose that edge, is they get down and then they're rushed, and maybe their string got caught and that wasn't such a clean catch, and they get down and try and play something and they just can't, it doesn't come off clean because of what, for whatever reason, right? But if they're not comfortable with the basics of diggity-ga-da and making sure that their hands are doing that movement the same way, that's why snares play those rudiments every week. until they can do them. They won't teach you another rudiment. Oh, we're not moving forward from mama dadas until you can do the mama dadas. There's a reason for that, right, guys?
I got a question for you that I've never really thought about, but when you're teaching a brand new student the tenor drum, how do you start them?
Quarter notes. 1, 2, 3. 1. Like I personally require that all of my students can read music so they can understand what's time signature. Like, who can tell me what time signature means in here? Everybody raise your hand if you can tell me what time signature means. You would be surprised at how many cannot. So one of my first things is, okay, 4/4. What does that mean? What does 4/4 mean? Literally being able to understand that so that we understand what the music that we're trying to play actually means. And so I would literally start with that. 4 beats in a measure, the quarter note gets 1 beat.
So you work on the basic rudiments, for lack of a better term, the sticking, before any of the flourishing stuff.
Anything. Theory is, I won't even bother to, like, I've lost students because, oh, and you don't teach enough swings. Well, I don't teach I don't teach people that. My process is the music and the theory and then the swings. That's just how I don't know. That's how I was raised. And maybe, like I said, I've lost students and people have complained at camps and blah, blah. But if you don't know what 4/4 time signature means, we have serious, serious problems beyond you being able to do some sort of split the feather or some sort of cool swing move that I made up in my backyard while I was, letting my dogs out. If you can't tell me what 4/4 time signature means, we got way bigger problems than that. And that is my number one most important thing. But yeah, I think that if you were to ask, certainly any of the gold medalists, that's what they would all tell you right now. I think we would all be on agreement right now. We're at a point where you got to be able to play. We can all swing really well, and it's all great and well and good, but we would all say, hey, understand what you're playing so that you can understand what you're trying to contribute to. What other questions do people have, or comments or thoughts? Kira?
What would you, or where would you recommend looking for a tenor instructor at, or how to find one?
I think you've got one right here on the Zoom call with us.
Yeah, you could ask me. You can ask anyone, you can ask lots of people, but I mean, yeah, you can ask me. I, admittedly don't have a ton of time, but you can ask me. I think, one of the coolest things that I ever did in my whole career was going to the Ohio Scottish Art School So 21 years ago, I went to the Ohio Scottish Art School, and I made some lifelong friends that I am still very good friends with today. So I would suggest going to a summer school, not only for the friends that you make. That's like really important and really fun. And I think that keeps us all doing it. But the improvement that you can make at a summer camp in 5 days or 6 days or whatever it is, when you have nothing to do but, do your pipe band stuff, kind of cool. And you will make progress that you thought was never possible. And so I would literally encourage everybody here to go to a summer camp, because you'll never get what you can get even in a week's worth of hour lessons every week. You're going to progress further in a week of summer camp easily. Doesn't matter who you're going to or where it is, you're going to progress further just because you are dedicating that time and you have 8 hours every day to play tenor. Think if you had 8 hours every day to play Minnesota, Maine, Minnesota, Maine, Minnesota, Maine, triplet tap, bippity boppity boo. You know, if you had all that time to play all that stuff, you're going to be far, far more ahead of where you were without. So I would, you know, online everywhere you can ask me for recommendations, suggestions. I'm happy to teach, but I think really any summer camp is a great place to start because just the time that you can dedicate to your craft. You know, I think people want to learn and get better at band practice every week, right? You go to band once a week and you're like, oh, I've got band on Thursdays. And well, all right, I'm going to go up the mountain and I'm going to go to band and great. But is that enough? And I can say, like, when I was coming up, that was nowhere near enough. I played every day after I got home for 4 hours a day. I would come home and play YouTube, and then I would come home and play the Worlds on the Worlds DVDs and learn everybody's medleys that I could with the little visuals and notes that I could. But I could play everybody's stuff, you know, because I liked it that much. And, you know, Joe, at a certain point, Joe taught me and then stopped. But it's also what you know, what you kind of want here and what you feel here, right? You know, that's our pulse. So if you really want it, anybody can do it, but it's about figuring out where to go. So.
Hey, Owen, can I say something contentious so that you don't have to?
Sure.
If you're going to a summer school or a weekend workshop or whatever it might be to seek education for your tenor drumming pursuits, please make sure that there is a tenor drumming instructor and that you're not just going to go sit with a snare drummer all week. Kind of a waste of your time. Also, make sure that that tenor instructor is a capable drummer so that you don't spend a weekend or an entire week spinning and not becoming a better drummer. Sorry, I've seen a bunch of all of what I just said, so I thought I should point that out since we're all here trying to be education minded. Make sure you're actually being educated in the full spectrum.
Yeah, and that was a far nicer way than I could have ever put it. So thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, PR is kind of my thing. I'm trying to be nice.
It's true though, right? And he's not trying to be negative, and he's not trying to say that you couldn't go and learn something, but you don't want to fly somewhere and learn how to swing for a week and still not be able to play triplet tap, because that's really useless. To that same effect, you don't want to go somewhere where they're just going to say, hey, play these couple notes and these few measures and we'll play something together at the end of the week. And because that's useless too. You want to go somewhere where it's going to be an intensive, dedicated focus. And that's where Piping Hot Summer Drummer, which I've taught at for 9 years now, and like the Ohio School, it's intensive focus, and it's bass and tenor players that are teaching that all day. And it's not you being spread out with, oh, hey, you're a tenor drummer, part of a drumming school that has, you know, 12 snare drummers and 2 tenor drummers. So the snare drummers are getting all the attention because the snare instructor has split the snare group into 3 classes. And oh shoot, all right, it's 11:45 right before lunch. Okay, tenors, let's just try and get through this march, right, Andrew? Like, that gets tricky, or you know, that's where it gets tough. So you don't want to.
Owen,
Yep.
you can learn off of anybody in the class. You don't need to have a teacher that is
Lois is here.
just
Hi.
somebody better than you. And it could just be a classmate.
That's right, Lois. Lois has been, I've known Lois for a long time now. Lois is at Piping Hot Summer Drummer every year, and she comes up every year up the mountain. And she's absolutely right. It doesn't matter who it is. There can always be somebody that you can learn from. And so I think Lois makes a good point where we could always be humbled and think that we could learn something from somebody else in the room as well. Thanks, Lois. I didn't even see you here, Lois. Good to see you.
We're coming up the end of our time here. I just wanted to ask one more thing. It seems, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that pipers and snare drummers tend to take more personal, individualized instruction, whether it be in person or online. Is that a fair statement, Owen?
Yeah, and, you know, I think that was something that as I was coming up as a kid, I was like, oh man, my buddy Joe. Well, you guys won't know him, but my buddy Joe and Mark, and you know, they were pipers, and you know, there was somebody that could always teach a piper and be like, okay, yeah, you want to take piping lessons? I can teach you. But you know, after a certain point, it got to a spot where I wasn't, I didn't have somebody that I was able to do that necessarily with, and I wasn't necessarily seeking lessons. But I think now, because of the way it has evolved over the last 25 years, whatever it is, you know, it's there's we have the opportunity to seek more consistent and constant instruction regardless of our age and our ability. And I think it's here for us. And I think that there are a lot of capable teachers. And what I know is that there are a lot more teachers than there were 25 years ago. And I was really lucky to have fallen into somebody that was willing to teach me. I mean, I was learning in the men's bathroom at, you know, an air base, an Air Force base in Minneapolis with Joe, you know, so they're there. You can still do it. Don't be discouraged because pipers and snare drummers are taking more regular lessons. That ability, that opportunity is still here today for us. So, Carly.
How would you go about or tell someone to go about finding an instructor for solo instruction or, sorry, one-on-one instruction that is a good fit for their skill level?
I think that anybody out there would be a good fit for people's skill level. I would just say, hey, recommend it. Like, hey, you know, you could take lessons. Let me know if you would like to meet this person. Do a warm introduction. You know, just like anything else. Hey, this guy teaches this. Why don't you have a chat, see what you're willing to get out of it? You know, it's tough because I think people are afraid of the financial aspect of it too. And I know people charge different rates and things like that, but I think that I can say with confidence that everybody would be willing to work with people. And I think that if you were to just encourage, you know, a student of yours to seek additional support and lessons, that if that's something that they want and their family can do, and you know, the instructor that you decide to work with, I think that everybody will make it work. I think that most of the, you know, good teachers out there today want to see people progressing through the ranks versus denying instruction for, oh, I just don't want to do it because I can't teach or money or that, you know. I think people want to do it. And I think that encouraging whoever it is that has any sort of interest to participate in the art form that we have is a great thing. And it's a limited art form. So I think we have to be mindful of that as well, you know?
Well, I can tell you that for those of you that live within the Midwest Pipe Band Association jurisdiction, at our last general meeting, we expanded our scholarship programs, and this year they are including tenor drummers. So if you compete here in the Midwest and do fairly well, we unfortunately we try and keep it to people under the age of 21, but just that's how it's always been. But we're going to expand that this year, and we're including tenor drummers in that scholarship program. So I'll just throw that out there. But Owen is being too modest here. Of course, he works with tenor drummers and teaches tenor drumming and does all that. I'm sure you could reach Owen through Facebook. And if you want somebody more local, I'm sure he could recommend somebody to you. But I'm sure Owen would be willing to work with anybody here.
Yep. That's true. And you know, always willing to work. You can reach out. Jim has my contact information, all of it, and Andrew Hoineke does too. And I do, you know, a couple different schools throughout the summer. The closest one to probably most of you is in Ohio, but always love to teach. You know, it's been a very important thing to me to teach and give back to where I started here in the Midwest. You know, and if it wasn't for people like Jim and Cliff and Andrew, I wouldn't have made it to do the things that I've been able to do. and gotten to where I have gotten with my career. So it's really important to me to give back to the local community as well here. So please do, if you ever want questions or, you know, want to just chat, even if you just want to have like a 20-minute, like, hey, can you like look at my score sheets and just give me some feedback, look at a video, happy to do that. So don't feel discouraged. Happy to do that, as Jim said. So
Well, we're up against the clock here. If nobody else has any other pending questions, as I say, Owen's on Facebook. You can always reach out to him, I'm sure. And if you can't reach out to him, let me know and I can get you his contact information. But on behalf of the Midwest Pipe Band Association, I wanted to thank you, Owen, for taking a couple hours out of your day and spending time with us. I think this is the first time this has happened, at least here in the Midwest, it's the first time. And it's going to become a continual part of our education series. We're not going to forget the tenor and bass drummers, that's for sure. In fact, this was our first one. So the first one we did was with the tenor drummer. So next month is with two-parted Strathspey reels for the grade 4 solo pipers, and Bob Worrell is going to be doing that. And then we'll have another one that will be announced coming up in March. So we're doing it every month, at least until the season starts. But Owen, I'll leave the last word for you.
well, thanks again. Like I say, it's always a pleasure to kind of come home and bring it home. You know, I've traveled for 17 years on the road playing in various associations, but it's always a pleasure to share the craft, the passion, and the art form with people around here. So I'm just, again, so grateful for the opportunity and for everything that everybody has done. Look forward to seeing you all in the future. Please, if you see me at a games, if I'm ever there, please just come up and say hello. You know, I don't bite hard. So please come over, and really, really neat. And I'm glad that we all get to share such a historic moment in the MWPBA's history together as well, actually. So very cool.
Thanks again, Owen, and thank you all for coming from Australia all the way to Canada, United States. It was all over. So thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your week. And I can just say, practice hard. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Owen.
Thank you.